All right, is setting up for Facebook. You may have to mute your Facebook page, but keep the mute on your, or keep the volume on your Zoom. All right, it says here meeting is streaming live on Facebook. And 1 second. All right, you should be able to see it. Good, all right. And I'm going to share to the group as well. And we'll get started. All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Voices of the BBFG. I'm your host, along with my co-host, Stephanie Lyons, the amazing Stephanie Lyons of the Black Business Focus Group. I'm also the CEO of To the Table, LLC, which is an online directory rating and review service for Black-owned businesses across the United States. We also have a group economics platform where you can log your Buy Black purchases across the United States as well. We're joined today by some very special guests, our panelists who are going to help us navigate our way through mental health. As you know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And some of you may not know, but the United Nations recently declared that we are under a mental health crisis across the globe. Keep in mind, we have the pandemic that's currently going on. As some of you may not know, but the United Nations. So we're working to ensure that we get as much information to our community as possible. So without further ado, I'm going to ask that our co-host introduce herself. She is a mental health advocate, Stephanie Lyons.
Thank you, Phillip. My name is Stephanie Lyons, and I am the former owner of All Student Shuttle. All Student Shuttle was a company that transported kids to and from school and after school activities in the Fort Bend area. We were active for almost 10 years, and we were second in the Fort Bend area. And we rose in the ranks very quickly. It's something we're definitely proud of. I've since, and that's my entrepreneurial background, but I've since closed the business and am now working for Total Petrochemical, which is the fourth largest oil and gas company in the world. And I currently support the entire sales department in the polymers department.
Thank you for that introduction, Stephanie. And now we're going to introduce a couple of our licensed professional counselors from our community, Katrina, Landry, and Valerian Sabastan Moore. I'd like for Katrina, if you don't mind, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me. I am the owner and one of the counselors at Renewed Hope Counseling Center. I'm in Humble, Texas, and I work with adults and couples.
And greetings and salutations. Sabastan Moore, and I am the owner and facilitator of Progress to Purpose Concierge Therapy, where we service primarily the Katy, Richmond, Rosenberg area, but also the greater Houston area with couples, children, anxiety, depression, and all the big rocks that we're dealing with in our community.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Ms. Landry. We also have another very special guest. This is a bonus guest that we have, and that's Mr. Andrew Landry of the nonprofit Where Men Hurt. Andrew, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Landry, and I am the owner and CEO, founder of Where Men Hurt. It's an organization designed to help men talk about real life issues in a safe, non-judgmental setting. We meet at a barbershop on Monday nights in Humble when we start meeting again. So look us up on Facebook and Instagram, and we'll get you connected.
All right, and thank you all for being here again. I can't tell you how much it means to have you all speaking directly to our community and to others. I wanted to get us started. If you all could kind of tell us a little bit about mental health issues, just in general, what does mental health cover? Is it, just going and talking to a counselor? Is it practicing meditation? What does mental health practice cover?
Well, I think it covers all of those things. As far as you mentioned mental meditation and talking to a counselor, and I just want to put this out there that I'm sure Ms. Landry would agree that everyone should have a therapist. There should not be a scenario, an individual that does not have a professional at their disposal. So the meditation part is a part of it. The balance, making sure you have work-life balance, making sure you're having healthy relationships, making sure you are framing your experiences in a positive light, and that you're able to process those experiences in such a way that you can benefit from them and not necessarily get stuck in them.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback on that part, I think one of the added things that therapy adds for clients is tools, right? We provide tools and resources to kind of help us manage the different things in life. And that doesn't mean that we have to be at a really significant low. It could just mean that we're wanting to either maybe process some things, figure out, hey, I ran into this, how should I handle this? And not necessarily looking for us for the answers, but for us to facilitate you walking through that journey and gaining understanding of self, of others, and then also providing those tools so that you can manage that, right? One of the things we had talked about when we were in school was that we're always working ourselves out of a job, so to speak, meaning that we're not here to be your dependent, but we're here to help you in this is your journey. And so, I think every person should have one, just even if it's for check-ins every now and then as things pop up, but that we are comfortable, we built a rapport with someone that we can be vulnerable with, because we're going to hit stuff in life.
I definitely think that you both are correct in that. Mental health is not just, I guess the way that I look at it, it's not just what we lack, but what we also have. Emotional intelligence is very important. Being self-aware is very important. At some point, we're all adults. And when we're kids, we have our parents that we answer to. But when we're adults, if we don't check ourselves and answer to ourselves, find a way to be self-sufficient and self-aware, we're just liable to just go off the cuff and do anything. And that can bring destruction to the people around us and even to some of those that we love. And so I think that mental health is being able to say, kind of like in the words of Mr. Brown, Self said, kind of be able to ask the question and to answer it. So, and that doesn't make you crazy. It just makes you aware. It makes you intentional. Mm-hmm. And I think to bring it back to the community in terms of our success in the community, if we want to be successful, if we want to heal some of the wounds in our community, then we're going to have to become self-aware. We're going to have to be able to check ourselves, just period, on a regular basis.
Andrew, your thoughts?
Well, obviously, all of those people are degreed and professional in their endeavors, and I appreciate their insight. What's a little, I come from a little different arena, but it's the same. I think it's having an avenue to be able to be comfortable. I deal a lot with men, being comfortable to be able to express to someone that you trust and that you will, are confident that they are protecting you and not trying to get you. And so what they say is correct. And I think that's very vital.
And I'm glad that you all said that, because that leads into this very next important question. In particular, in our community, there's certain stigmas attached to, talking about mental health. And well, I think Stephanie alluded to it earlier, we don't want to be labeled as crazy for wanting to go out and seek mental health counseling or improve. So how can we, defeat some of those stigmas? And then where do they even start? How did this stuff, get started? So kind of walk us through that, Katrina and Sabastan.
Well, I think One of the things I talk with a lot of clients about from our community is this strong Black, whichever, right? Black female, Black male, that we've kind of had these things of we're tough, don't cry. And even from female perspective, sometimes we've had this, suck it up, let's go. And we haven't had a lot of time to be taught what our emotions are and what to do with them. And so I think a lot of times when we have those, we've kind of grown up with, if I share, if I'm vulnerable, I'm seen as weak. If I cry, I'm seen as weak. And so as a culture, we just kind of have cultivated that in our thought process of how we navigate through life, of just how strong we're supposed to be, and not realizing that the vulnerability takes a significant amount of strength to be able to let those walls down. It's easy to keep it there, right? But to actually move those things are difficult. And so I think that if we can change how we perceive what weak is helpful. And then two, because we also view when we talk about mental health, or I like the word health better than illness, right? Because that sounds like a negative connotation. But if we look at it as mental health, if we go to the doctor for checkups, we want our body to be healthy, right? We want to make sure that we're taking, if we need medication, we're taking medication for our body to be healthy. We're doing exercises, we're supposed to be doing exercises to make our body healthy. And so if we can view it more in a way of us wanting to be mentally healthy, that would be important, because our health is, when we translate that into health mentally, it becomes emotionally, are we stable? Emotionally, can we handle those, the things that we are dealing with in life? Mentally, how are we viewing the world? Do we need to challenge those things? Are they skewed based on our past experiences? And so doing those check-ins and doing some preventative things can help us. And so just viewing it more from a health perspective, just like we would with our body, can help change that as us feeling like something's wrong with us, as opposed to, hey, let's just be healthy mentally too.
I think that one of the things that she said that was very true, as far as the health part in general, I feel like culturally, we kind of struggle with health overall. Just being more cognizant of how important it is to do the little things on a day-to-day basis to help ourselves, even from a physical standpoint. Hypertension and diabetes and all those types of things that are directly connected to our eating habits, and a lot of the things that we've passed down from generation to generation. And so, we kind of take for granted that this is just the way it is. And so therefore, you tend to overlook that there are options to do different or do better. And so, one of my favorite hashtags is break the stigma, because there is a stigma, and it's a historical stigma, right? We've not had the luxury in a lot of ways to be vulnerable, because a lot of the fights that we've had to face as a community did not allow us to be vulnerable in that way, because in order to get to the change, we had to be strong on the outside. And so that opportunity to kind of be vulnerable and open and let the wounds heal, they never take place. And so, you kind of intentionally and unintentionally pass that on to your children.
Mm-hmm.
They observe it and they pick up on it. And then on top of that, you're reinforcing it with some of the things that Ms. Landry said, with, hey, suck it up, you don't cry, be tough, and all of those types of things. So when you're talking about, mental health as a commodity unto itself, that would be for other communities, I would say. But like specifically for ours, it's health overall,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so as we become more affluent and we have more exposure, then we are now starting to see the benefits of, regular workouts and eating differently and taking advantage of mental health, right? So, but you still have a significant portion of the population that does not have that exposure, that might not be on this stream because they're not in circles with folks who talk about that, right? They're still on the daily grind. And so, it's kind of incumbent upon us to kind of put it in their face to make it okay. So by us being vulnerable and saying, hey, I personally have a therapist, or hey, I personally have struggles, or hey, my man, like, let's talk. I'm real frustrated right now. How you feeling? Like what happens with Brother Landry, right? We're spreading that and slowly but surely taking it away from stigma. Um, but again, you have historical generation after generation of this being what we deem to be the most effective coping skill.
Yeah. I think one of the struggles that we have as a culture too is because it's our norm. We struggle with changing our norms, right? It's been culturally, it's been their mom taught like this or their parent taught like this, and this is what we normally do. And so for branching out into something different, one, are we aware of it? Do we know anything different? And then two, because I'm doing something different, not only am I trying to change me, but then I got my family that's tends to be unaccepted of that too, right? Again, going back to if I want to eat healthy and everyone else wants to eat whatever we normally eat, we have even within our own cultures having struggles with that support and acceptance too. So part of it again is just going back to, can I be okay? That's part of us even breaking into this of saying, I got to make a decision that's really okay for me, and hopefully I can be the catalyst change in my family.
And I want to add to that little part one little tidbit. I think what we have done is that we've normalized undermining other people's attempts to improve. So much so that we, and mind you, this is many years in the making, but the dozens, ranking, chopping, right? So we've made a whole game, a real life activity out of making fun of somebody's shortcomings, you know? So if that's the world that you're living in, even with people outside your immediate circle, then when you come inside your circle and you're trying to do something different that's outside of what that circle is accustomed to, and undermining a person's differences is a part of how you relate to one another, then it takes a different level of strength to say, even though I'm going to go through this reunion, they're going to talk about me crazy for having a therapist, or for me eating this kale, eating this kale, you have to develop a different level of resolve,
And I'm glad you said that, because it's not always a shortcoming that we dive into. It's people's attempt to elevate themselves that listen at you speaking good English, listen at you try to dress like them folks, and it's those types of things that can be damaging to our community. And I'm glad that you said that. I want to engage kind of Andrew in one of the things that you all said. There's this statement in our community: be a man, be tough, don't cry. So you have to suppress a lot of those feelings, a lot of those, anxieties, feelings of depression, anger, anxiety, all under the guise of quote unquote being a man. How do we tackle that alone in our community and correct that behavior and that mindset?
Well, I think and I want to address something that they said a little earlier. Culturally, that we like coming up, I didn't know what a counselor was, right? The only counselor I knew was a school counselor, and that didn't really mean anything to me because nobody had taught me about that. So I think a lot of the introduction to having the counselor or the mental health kind of growing is now making it more aware for those of us who didn't really know what a counselor was or what the purpose was. So when you went to a counselor at school, well, when I went, it was to go talk about what I was going to do for college. It didn't talk about what was going on at home, or the issues that I was dealing with maybe being bullied or whatever was going on, or facing racism. So I think that's one of the things that culturally we were undereducated about counseling and the mental health. So now as adults, because we feel like, we got it together, my way is the right way, I'm doing okay. So now we don't feel like we need that help, or we seek out that help. So that was the first part. And then the other part about being, we have been taught, be a man, grow up, don't cry. And a lot of that comes from what they were taught. The thing that we don't realize most of the time is that the people that taught us came from a place where somebody taught them. And then they passed that down. because they think it's right. And so now we have the opportunities to say, hey, there's something that's not exactly right. A lot of times in marriage, the Bible says iron sharpens iron, so as one man sharpens another. And to me, I say, if you're married, that person is your spouse. That spouse is that iron that sharpens you, because they're going to be able to get some things out of you that the normal person on the street is not. And so those are some indicators of things that may be, their complaints or whatever about you, or things that may need to be addressed that you never addressed. But you don't see that unless you have somebody that is able to see those things and help bring them out.
And I definitely wanted to say, kind of, I guess, on the same thing, and I think we're all saying the same thing, in terms of where it comes from. We know that we didn't have time to address these issues. It was about survival. Get out there, make that money, go get those groceries. These kids got to eat, and so they couldn't give us what they didn't have, just period. And so while we don't blame them for that, because there was some mental illness set up in that, just in terms of, historically, how the community was treated. And, it's not, we don't have time for that. This train is moving, we got to get on it. I think once we can become, again, more self-aware, and we can look back and see how it affected our ancestors and the destruction that maybe some of that caused, blessings and curses on the family. Now that we know better, we got to do better. But first you have to identify it, and you have to be strong enough and courageous enough to look at it in the face and identify it. And so first comes, like you said, be a man. Well, what does that mean? Well, some of the strongest thing that you can do is to look at yourself in the mirror. Just stare at yourself in the mirror, 10, 15 seconds, just really look at yourself. And be honest, just be honest, and that can be the most courageous thing I think man or woman can do.
Now, I'm glad you brought up a couple of things. I want to try to bring in this to the discussion. There's two things that, we have to really look at differently. The first thing, I'm going to put it out there. I know I'm getting ready to make some folks mad, and hopefully they don't kick us off Facebook. But, we've all been taught in our community that anytime we have some type of emotional issue, we just need to pray on it. And by praying on it, we take it to the Lord in prayer. And we do this faithfully. And I think that we should continue to do that. But I also know that faith without works is dead. And so I want y'all to speak on that in a second. But then that other thing that you talked about, Stephanie, generational trauma. And, when I think about some of the things that we inherited mentally from our ancestors, if you take a look at our diet, many of us, we still eat what the slaves ate back then. And so if our diet didn't really change, how so will our mental health, have changed? And so I wonder if y'all can speak on that. These are two bombs that, could upset a lot of folks, but I think we'll talk about it.
Yeah, because those greens and hog maws and oxtails ain't going nowhere.
We're going to have that. We're going to have that.
Well, I just want to kind of talk about, I think when I got married, my husband eats different than I eat. And so we struggled a lot with that part. And I think in the beginning, I was trying to say, hey, we need to incorporate this. This is important. This is good. This is good. And they were not having it. So I said, okay, fine. You cook, you do whatever it is that I let him have it. And so I think it's taken a really long time, but he implements some of the things that I like mainly because I think that they're good, or because I like them, but it also, that's that iron and sharpening iron that, hey, this may not be something he's going to put on his plate normally, but if we're eating, I'm saying, hey, let's put some salad on here. It may be a little bit, right? But at least he's going to put it on there where he may not have done it before. And so I think that that's where it's good when we are able to be around people who are not always just like us, because that can help us to promote that change part. So I think when we're talking about generational things, I had shared with him, I said, before the age of 20, I have been on a farm in the hood in upper middle class. and in the country. I've been exposed to all of those things. And I think that all of those exposures allow me to have a different kind of perception of stuff. But our culture typically is here, right? We're usually in this particular area. This is how we see life. This is how we do things. And so it may be difficult for us to go to the other side. I think where our response typically is what is perceived as anger to a lot of people, but in defense for us. And I always talk with clients about anger being a secondary emotion most of the time, right? And so if we know what anger looks like, but do we know what disappointment looks like? Do we know what disrespect looks like? And so since we don't know what those look like, we just exhibit it in anger. And so us really backing up and saying how I felt, our first response is, well, I'm mad at you, or you made me angry, or you made me mad. That's probably not your real feeling about it, but we got to take the time again with that self-awareness and like, what really happened and how did that really impact me? And so I think that's us having to be taking that time so that we can address our emotions in a different way. And about the part with religion and the prayer, we kind of touched on this a little bit when we were chit-chatting yesterday. I typically use cognitive behavioral therapy when I work with my clients. And as licensed professionals, we have ethics that we have to abide by. And so just because I'm a Christian, I can't enforce my views on others. However, if that's a conversation that you want to include in here, we will. And one of the things is that cognitive behavioral therapy is so much like Bible, right? The Bible talks to us about pulling down every stronghold. It talks about taking every thought into captivity. And so therapy is really just a way of being able to provide you tools with how to do those. And we can pray, and that's great. And I think that meditation and prayer and all of those things are important because God can communicate with us in those things. Same way that he used people, if we go back in the days in the Bible, he used people to do different things. We, Hello Counselors, are those people nowadays that are helping, providing those tools that maybe you didn't have to help with carrying that out. We go to church to hear, right? And then we go to therapy so that we can have the tools to make it applicable. So if we kind of combine those two, then I think that we can kind of, that's where we have our faith of God, you're able to do this. Every miracle that he performed, he had a requirement of somebody else. And so we can't just be like, okay, well, God, I'm praying and you got it. He's going to require something from us. And sometimes it's the counselors that help people to say, hey, this is a tool on how I can accomplish this requirement or this thing that God is asking for me to do. So I think coupling those together are going to really be important.
I think what she's saying is especially true. And the part that I got from it and that I'd like to expound on a little bit is the idea that, you know, the prayer in and of itself is not the solution. That is a step towards the solution. And what we don't often do is we don't take the next step. Well, we do the church and then we go back to life as normal until next Sunday for most of us. Or, you know, you may go to Bible study and it's great, but that in between time where you go back and you read the rest of the chapter that the scripture came from on Sunday, and, you know, you pray about that and ask for insight on that and how that applies to you, you know, a lot of times that's the part that doesn't happen. So, you know, we kind of use religion almost as a crutch, you know, versus it being a resource to help us get closer in our relationship and improve as an individual. We just kind of like, well, you know, if you just pray about it, because truth be told, a lot of times we say those types of things because we don't know what to say, right? I don't know what to tell you right now, since you've lost someone that matters to you, or you've lost your job and it had nothing to do with you. You didn't do anything wrong, you know, you know, so just pray about it. You know, I can say that with confidence. And, you know, are you really going to pray about it? And I saw a post a while ago where someone said, when somebody tells you that they're going to pray for you, that was the prayer. Right? And I was like, that's very true. Like a lot of times that's what we would do. We'll say, you know, just saying what we say, you know, and not doing the work behind it. So to tie it back to my original or our original point, which is everyone needs a therapist. That's what the therapist is there to do. So I prayed about it. I have insight on it. So now how am I going to apply it? And that's, I think what Ms. Landry is saying, I don't know how to apply it. Like I know what I'm supposed to do, but what does that look like for me? And so even in sessions that I have for clients, I've had, coupling, like I know how to do anger. They'll say outright, I know how to do anger, but that's not what you're saying with the secondary emotion, but that's not what you're saying, because right now, those tears that are flowing, that's not just anger. There's a lot more behind that. So, just that emotional component, we have to be comfortable with melding that emotional need with that intellectual application. And I think that's kind of where we fall short, applying the intellect to the emotion. And that kind of creates a gap between, expressed need and need being met.
I'm glad y'all said that. One of our members, Shamika D. Sampson, says that the Bible says that faith without works is dead. Have the faith, but go to work on what you've asked God for. And I think that work is going to seek counseling, learning about some of these mental health practices that you guys are going to share with us later on. But it has to be more to it than just leave it at the altar and walk away.
Now, and Phillip, I wanted to say that was going to be my point, is that I think when we say, well, just pray about it, we have to look at what that's kind of saying or what it said to us historically. So, and forgive me here, just stay with me for a minute, but I think that's kind of a lazy approach. And some people are going to be mad with that. I'm not saying not to pray about it. I'm not saying not to pray about it. I am a praying woman. But I think it gives us permission, because we'll say, well, baby, leave it in his hands. Leave it in his hands. You've already put in your request, now walk away from it. But there's something, like you said, in terms of partnering. We have to partner with God and allow him. The prayer gives permission for him to act on our behalf. But like you said, faith without works is dead. I still need to do something. Anytime anyone has been successful in life and business and a job, you have to do something. You have to partner with someone. You work with a team. In construction, they definitely work on teams, so you don't get anything done. So I think by just saying and just leaving out the other part, it's good to pray, but what is the action that needs to go with it? Because I'm going to leave it in his hands and give him permission to work on my behalf. But, and again, maybe this goes back to our ancestors and just not knowing better. That's all they could do. They didn't have the tools, and it's not their fault. But I think going forward, once we know better, we need to do better. And while we need to pray and leave it in his hands, giving him permission, but I'm responsible. There's something I need to do. And I can't be mad with God when things don't come into fruition when I haven't done my part. Because it's kind of like, I guess, in a sense that, if you give someone, about fishing versus giving someone a fish versus fishing, we've seen instances where, if you give someone something, they may not appreciate it versus working for it once they've had some skin in the game. Without having some skin in the game, sometimes even when blessings come, we really don't appreciate the magnitude of it. So, if we feel like this, then most certainly does not God feel the same way, and he's sovereign. So, we have to be responsible. We have to bring something to the table, not just leave it in his hands, walk away. And that's kind of a lazy attitude to say, well, I done prayed about it. That's my responsibility. That's my total responsibility. That's all I did. It's not enough. It's just not nowadays. It's just not enough.
Yeah. I want to piggyback, Phil, you're on mute, but I want to piggyback off of that. One of the things that I tell some of the guys that I deal with when they say, well, I prayed about it or just pray about it, is we have to recognize and realize that prayer is just one of the tools, right? So if you're building a house, you can't just use a hammer. You need a saw, you need nails, you need screws. So it's different tools that are available to use, where prayer is saying, okay, now you got a foundation. You got something to start with. Now let's go and start building this house. And so that's one of the things that we have to kind of, in our religious dogma, we have to kind of back away from that prayer is just going to do it, because that's not the design nor the intent of God.
Right. And you know what? I think something that we kind of have to bring out, and it kind of goes back to advocating for everyone having a therapist, is the idea that we do have these like cliched responses to a lot of different scenarios in religion and outside of religion that we say. And the thing is, when you say those things and it's like group think, that leaves a lot of room for interpretation by the individual who's receiving the message. And that person who's receiving the message is going to filter that message through their own insecurities, fears, doubts, needs, wants, and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of times the message gets convoluted because it was so simplistic in its offering that I can take it how I want to take it, right? So we say, go and pray about it. Happy wife, happy life. Know better, do better. Like all these are things that we say, but know better, do better, or happy wife, happy life, or go and pray about it. That looks different for me than it does for you in a lot of cases, because if I pray about it, if I'm walking and praying, for me, that's enough. Somebody else might go in the whole prayer closet and, I'm going to give it all I got. I'm gonna get the sackcloth and the ashes and do the whole thing, So when we give these responses, we have to understand that working out the steps to that is why we have a therapist. Because if I just use my own logic about the situation and how to apply it, then I probably won't make much progress, because my own logic in a lot of cases is what got me into this situation to begin with.
One of the things I think when we talk about a therapist, it's also important to find one that works well with and for you, right? For me, I'm more of a directive therapist. I'm not usually the one that sits on, across from you and says, okay, well, just, how does that make you feel? I'm going to do some real challenging with you on your thought processes, on your ways, on how you see things or how you're behaving. I've had clients not be happy when they left the sessions because we are talking about some stuff of, hey, the way that you're doing this, it feels comfortable for you. It's what you know, but it's not healthy. And so because we built a rapport, they're going to come back next week and say, you know what? One, they're going to come back. Two, when they come back, it is, I understand why this is important for my life. I don't like it. And I think that's the thing. We will stay in a maladaptive behavior, a behavior that's not healthy, because it's what we know. I'm comfortable in it. I know what to expect from it. I know how to react in it. It's what I know. But now you're asking me to change to something that I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to respond. I don't know how I'm going to feel. I don't even know if this is going to work. And you're asking me to change years of how I've been doing something. And it's hard and it's scary. And so part of our role, and this is our journey. I use this a lot. We journey with you. We're here with you, saying, when you come in this week and you say, you know what, I'm really working on my patience with my spouse. And we're saying, hey, you know what, this week, I gave him the business, and we're saying, okay, well, look, this week, let's work on how we're not going to block our spouse. Or this week, we're going to work on how we're going to remain in this space of uncomfortability, and us learn how to stay in that space and manage that without exploding to other people. And so it's also a place where we're accountable, right? This is a safe space for us to be accountable. I work with couples, and so sometimes being accountable to our spouse sometimes still can be a sore spot, because sometimes we can't break or we can't fail in front of them. And so making sure that when we had some broken areas, that's one of the things that therapy can journey with you, is saying, hey, I know you didn't do this, this was not perfect, and we're not asking you to be perfect. What we are saying is, let's work on it week by week, day by day. And the homework assignments that we give are things that you keep building on, right? I often use it in the sense of, you go to, if I'm talking to a female, I may use a purse. If I'm talking to a guy, I may use like a toolbox or something like that that's applicable. But we have a bag, and whatever we're using, if I'm going in my purse for some chapstick, I'm not going to pull out a brush. It was kind of similar to what Andrew was saying. When you have different tools for different scenarios, for different situations, and we got to have those and know when we can pull those out and how they work for us. And so making sure that we have that therapist there that helps journey with you in that and can help you with that accountability is also going to be important, because we don't expect perfection. I do challenge you though. It's not going to be this, it's work, right? I'm not going to work harder at your life than you, but therapy is work. And we know that it's going to pull out some stuff that you don't like. It's going to pull out stuff that's hurtful, and that it's going to be self-reflective. And sometimes looking at self is really ugly. But we're there, and it's non-judgmental, and you can be there, and you can break, and we can pick up the pieces over there, and we help restructure those broken pieces so that we can be more whole.
And I
want to draw something out here real quick, because you guys really touched on a lot of different, topics. And, I want to see if you guys can give us some free advice here. A lot of us who experience, mental challenges or mental issues, it's usually behind some lie that we tell ourselves or some untruth that we tell ourselves that constantly plays in our mind. How do you break that constant playback of that thing that keeps you trapped in that maladaptive behavior? And Stephanie, I believe you're about to say.
Yeah, and it was actually piggybacking on exactly what you were saying. So we're of the same thought process. One of the best pieces of advice someone gave me was, you can never judge the behavior until you know what they're thinking. And so, when you're saying that, just in terms of how do we do that? Well, first we have to be honest with ourselves in terms of what we're thinking, be it good, bad, or indifferent, right or wrong. I was listening to Katrina and thinking about, a computer. Everybody has a phone or a computer, and every once in a while you get viruses, you need updates. Some updates take longer to load than others, the worse the virus, the longer it takes to fix it. So in terms of, like you were saying, with therapy and going through the process with people, and, some people may say, well, I just want to go one time. And that's something else too. If you're going to therapy, you need to be dedicated to it, because just one, a one-stop, done is just not, it's not going to make it. Just going to one session is not going to solve all of your problems. So I was just thinking, just in terms of, processors and computers, a processor, in terms of how the computer thinks and processes information, giving you the output, is so important, to where if you have a bad processor, they'll tell you, go throw it out, just go buy a new computer. Processing is that important. And you have to look at how you're processing information, and be woman enough or man enough to know, if there's something wrong with my processor, I need to go get this checked, because it's giving you, any of the output or the results that you're getting may be because of the input and the processing. Again, you can't judge the behavior until you know what they're thinking. So I think that that's one way that we can do it, Phil.
I think what we probably have to do is understand that the whole black and white approach is probably not the best approach. Life is full of gray and gray areas, and so too our responses to those experiences. So when you or I decide that this is how I'm going to respond to this thing, we have to be cognizant and aware of the fact that there's a certain level of self-protection that's included in that. There's a certain level of doubt or fear that's included in that. There's a certain level of need that's included in that. And so we conclude that that's the right, quote unquote, way to handle it. And I think the first thing we have to do is understand that that is not the quote unquote right way to handle it. It is a way to handle it. But in getting that support and that help, you hopefully find that there are other ways that you can also handle it. And in that process, those other ways hopefully get you better results. And so what you then learn is, there isn't a right way for the duration of my lifetime, right? The same experience at 22 and single is very different, and my response should also be different at 32 and married, or 33 and one kid, or 40 and no kids. Like, those different stages in life require us to think differently, respond differently, because we're in a different stage. There's a different expectation of us. There's a different, goal should be a different goal. at the end of that. And so a lot of times what maladaptive truly is just I did what worked out of necessity in that moment, and I kept doing it. Right? I never thought beyond that moment. So anytime I see anything remotely close to that experience or that feeling, then I'll respond the way I did the first time.
So is that kind of a handicap, would you say? I mean, is that, because you can't take one formula and just attach it to everything across the board. It's not going to work.
Right. It's survival in a
Yeah.
lot of ways. And a lot of people kind of get stuck in that survival mode.
Right.
Because we have such busy lives, and because we aren't challenged, and especially in our community we don't talk about mental health as children, and as teenagers. We get into adult, and a lot of who you are is formulating those first 5 years, and then by the time you get to 14, 15, in most cases you are pretty much who you're going to be, and there'll be different variations of that person, right? But ideally it's a more mature version of the same person. Right. But once you spend all that time formulating your strategies, formulating your perspective on life, formulating your needs and your wants and how you cope with those needs and wants, and you move into adulthood without having challenged those at any point, well then what am I supposed to do? Now my brain is on autopilot. I'm not really, I say I'm thinking, this is what I'm thinking, but I wasn't really thinking. I was reacting, and my reaction is based on brain chemistry, like how my brain is designed to find the most efficient way to a solution. And so if my brain already recognizes that this is a pathway, it's going to automatically go there. And that's the work of therapy, to change that pathway, and understand that there are different routes that you can take, which takes me back to the original point, which is there's not, in most cases, a right response, but you can always look for a better response.
And one of the things I think, Phil, that you kind of hit on, how do we go about, changing it? I think one of the things that we can do in the community, just to piggyback on what you were saying, is shame is a big part of it. We need to stop shaming each other for getting help, for wanting to get the help. And I think Andrew kind of spoke on that in terms of the men's group. It's non-judgmental. No one's going to use it as a weapon against you. And I think from a female perspective, we need to take a look at that. What does a strong Black male look like? What does a strong Black female look like? I personally, and it's just me, when I hear strong Black female, or if someone calls me a strong Black female, let me say that, it's not, in my opinion, it's not a compliment, a direct compliment, and I'll tell you why. Because you process those words in the order that they're received: strong Black female. So if I'm strong first, it almost makes me an inanimate object, kind of like a piece of furniture. And I think the world has kind of treated Black women like that, in terms of, we don't deserve to be, soft. We don't deserve to be treated as females. We're not women, who deserve that emotional part. We're not thought of like that, because strong is being processed first. I myself am a woman and a woman of color who, is capable of being strong whenever it's needed, but I'm not strong first. I think that just kind of, in some kind of unconscious way, kind of takes the human portion out of it for Black women. And, so we're just kind of treated that way. And I don't want people to take that and just kind of run with it. I'm not saying, because people, they say it and they mean it in the best possible way. But I'm just speaking in terms of what we can do in the community, things that we say consciously and unconsciously that may be adding to the problem.
Right. Semantics do matter. It does matter what you say. It does matter the words that you choose. And that's a good example of it, because I think a lot of people, in your particular example, when you say strong Black woman, they kind of aspire to manifest that in their daily lives. And though it has its benefits in some areas, it definitely has its drawback in others, because, though you may be able to present that, that does not mean you don't have other needs in other areas. And if you're not in a space in your presentation to allow someone to meet that need, then now you have an unmet need. And so now your frustration is doubled or tripled or whatever the case may be, because, you know, your image, your brand, so to speak, is this kind of singularly layered, one textured entity versus the multi-layered, multi-textured reality of what any person would be.
And sometimes we as women, we do it to ourselves. I don't think, that we, really think about that, oh, she's a strong girl, you're a strong Black woman. And again, it's not, an insult, but I think in the way that we use it and how often we use it, then there's an underlying expectation, well, even if I want to be and I want to be vulnerable at this time, I can't because she thinks I'm a strong Black woman. When really all I want to do is melt. I just need a safe place to melt.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's two things I want to talk about with that. One is I think that we have a pride issue. And I think two, we have our views kind of what you were saying earlier about the interpretation part. How do I interpret strong? Because it can look different for different people. Again, going back to what are we used to? If I'm used to, if I think that strong is a man working with his hands, and because if that's what I'm used to, and that's what I viewed as strong, so then if I see someone else who doesn't work with their hands, now how do I view them, right? So now it's also being mindful of how we view strong, or and that goes for either or, man or woman, right? This isn't a sex thing because it's a cultural thing of what we've developed, what our cultures, these ideals of what the women are supposed to be and the men are supposed to be. And sometimes we make them interchanged, but they look different in a sense, right? So we're both supposed to be strong. We both are supposed to be, deal with and endure. Again, culturally, we've endured so much, but then we also are looking at why are we continuing the pattern of enduring things that are unnecessary when we have issues within our own cultures that we're continuing to have to, that we're creating endurance for that part. I think the other thing comes with that pride issue of I am right, or I have to be right, or that if you can't tell me that I'm wrong or that my way is different. And so I think that sometimes, again, it's still what we've kind of all been talking about is the survival skill, right? But if we were to be teachable, right? If this is kind of one of these things that if part of therapy is about allowing ourselves to really be able to be open to hearing something different than our way. And I'm going to go back to what we talked initially. I can't just hear, I have to be able to apply it. You can go to counseling every single week. And if you don't apply it, your life is going to be the same. And you can't say that therapy doesn't work. If I say, hey, there's a mechanic that you need to go get your car fixed, and I've had it all set up for you. I've told him everything that's needed, and you don't go, and your car still has issues. It's not that you didn't have the resources, it's that you chose not to use them. And so I think that it's coupled with those things of, and I guess I kind of say that because sometimes you'll see that with couples. Well, I went to therapy and it didn't work. How much of this are you allowing to change your perceptions, your thought process? Again, this is my normal, and you don't know what she's done to me. You don't know what he's done to me. And so we've stayed in this environment where we are staying protective. And at some point, we're going to have to realize that way just is not working anymore. And so we have to, in addition to not wanting to be shameful, we also can't be prideful. And in order for us to really be open and vulnerable with that, we have to be willing to hear and do something different.
Now, I want to turn our attention to something that impacts our entire community. And we have about 20 minutes left on this panel discussion. There's two more things that we need to cover that our viewers need to hear about, and they need to hear about it specifically from us. And social media, and we've all seen this, social media has given us a platform where now we can actually witness what has happened to young Black men and young Black women in our community. Recently, we had an issue where a young man was shot while jogging in Georgia. We had a situation where a young woman was killed while sleeping in her own apartment. We didn't see the video for that, but social media helped to spread the information about it. Then we had a situation in Oklahoma where a delivery driver was trapped into a community. And I could only imagine all the generational subconscious material that, came to him as he was experiencing that one event. Talk to us about these experiences that our community is having to deal with, the trauma that we continually see day after day, and then how do we manage that? How do we counteract that mentally? This stuff is it can be very anxiety inducing. And oftentimes it produces thoughts where we don't trust our brothers and sisters from other communities. How can we deal with that effectively in the Black community going forward?
Well, and it's something, Phil, because I really would like to hear from the guys on this, and just really kind of listen. And Andrew, I don't know if you can kind of jump in here, but I've been curious to kind of know, what is the feeling, or what are the men thinking, when you guys are talking in those private spaces? How are they feeling? Because, we were just talking about changing, the pathways and thinking differently. But then when something triggers it, you go back to the old thinking. So is this really creating some form of PTSD in terms of, okay, we're trying to go into this direction, but see, we still have this same kind of behavior that we're fighting. So how can you ask me to change this when this is still going on? And so it's kind of, that tug of war. So can you just kind of speak on that? I'm just really curious. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm really curious to be a fly on the wall and know, what are Black men thinking?
In our discussions, we had a small discussion about this, the Aubrey shooting. The primary things is, for us, it puts the Black male in a catch-22, because we see these issues and we want to retaliate because we don't feel like there's justice. But we know that if we retaliate, we contribute to the generational issues that we have with, Black imprisonment, fatherless homes. So it's kind of a catch-22 in the sense that what we will probably do to protect what is ours, since we call it the Black community, we want to protect our community, we can't do, because if we do, then we destroy our Black community. And so it's hard to manage those emotions, because I don't really do a lot of posts politically or otherwise, but it's hard to be able to address those issues because we don't know what approach is best. I think you spoke about earlier about talking about how to be a man. Well, what does that mean to somebody if nobody knows what it was to be a man? When I was growing up, I seen all my, we'll say, uncles cheat on their wives. So I thought that was being a man. So then did it cause me to do it when I was going through my situations? So I think it's the same. We don't have the education out there on how to handle these, and we won't take the necessary steps to get the help to deal with them.
I think that we kind of need to do is understand that the outrage and the anger is justified. At the same time, one, the outrage and the anger cannot be the end of it. Mm-hmm. So there has to be a focus of that energy into a productive way, and understand that, working within the system has not always worked for us, but we have the power, as with the BBFG and other things like that, to kind of create our own system to create the power that we need to impact change, right? And so, we're thinking, in my opinion, like we're looking for justice, and justice may not be on the table. It may be that we just need to put ourselves in positions of power and of influence. And so by doing that, we influence policy, we influence economics. And when you influence policy and economics, you then influence change, And so, without trying to get very political about the situation, if we were to go all the way back to, Jackie Robinson as an example, right? We say, oh, first Black man, in the American National League to play ball on a team. But, maybe Branch Rickey was thinking, hey, I think these, guys deserve the right to play regardless of color. But then there's also that economic aspect. If I can get these particular athletes in that can perform at a certain level, then over time people will pay to see regardless of color. And so, it's tricky because justice is something that you deserve. Right is, you have rights, you deserve to have those rights. But we have to look at the whole picture and understand that the game that system is playing is not the same game we're fighting.
And I appreciate those points, man, because y'all are talking about some things that I think we really got to walk a fine line, right? We know we can't retaliate eye for an eye, and I think that kind of limits us in our response. What Sabastan is talking about, we do in the Black Business Focus Group. We're building an economy where businesses, Black-owned businesses, can count on our community. They can count on our community. They can go out and grow and expand. If they grow and expand, they can, fund candidates that are favorable, or that can design legislation and policy that's favorable to our community so that we can get justice. So I think that, what we're doing right now in the Black Business Focus Group is one action item we all can take to help defeat that. Now, I kind of want to touch on kind of that feeling question that you asked about, Stephanie. When Walter Scott in Charleston, South Carolina, was gunned down running away from a police officer, and it was captured on video. And the police officer tried to frame it as if, he tried to take his taser. We clearly saw what, had been happening to Black men all over America for a long time in that particular situation. And let me tell you about my feelings about that. The next day I went to work feeling just completely depressed about that, because I felt like at any given moment that could have been me. Now, also in that same space, my coworkers, my counterparts, who many of them were white, went on as if nothing had happened. To me, this was a 9/11 moment where I knew that if I had been stopped by the police, that I had to work within a certain construct just to make sure that I could continue on. To them, it was another day in the park. And so I think that we're caught in a situation where we have to exercise discipline, systematic and disciplined approaches in order to build power and influence, so that we can influence these things, so that we can deal with them better economically, socially, and in the criminal justice system. But that feeling does not go away anytime I see a police officer. And no disrespect, I back the blue. I've got family that's in law enforcement, so I definitely want to support them. But there is a matter of mistrust that's been built up between law enforcement and the Black community. And I think that we can work on that a little bit more down.
I like what you said, Phil, and I'm glad that you said that, because I was curious to know how you felt, or what was the feeling from the corporate America side, and what you were feeling in the office. Because I don't know about you, but I didn't take a look for the longest at the tape of Ahmaud Arbery. I couldn't. I have to. It's part of my way of coping. It may not be right, but at the time, that's all I could do, because I still have to go to work and work with those that do not look like me, that may look more like, his accused murderers. And, just to be honest with you, it just makes you feel some type of way, that this happens, and you're constantly seeing it. And I'm expected to go in and say, hey, good morning, how you doing? It just chips away at you. It chips away at you because, like you said, that it could be me, my 18-year-old daughter. And now, like you said, it was men, and now it doesn't matter. It's men and women. And she got a ticket. And the first time she was shaking. She was upset. She didn't know what to do. She knew enough, and we'd already had the talk, to call me. Just call me, and I could hear the cop saying, is that your mother that's on the phone? I'm sure that they're seeing a lot more of it too. It's becoming commonplace for them. But it's just, it's just scary, because nothing and no one is off the table. There's no way to tell, well, this will happen to this person, but it won't happen to me. We're all in the same boat together.
And it's very scary. And it takes us to our last two questions. I was on a call with some folks this week, and one of the things that was brought up was the overall Black mentality and our psyche. And one of the things that happens immediately after a tragedy like Ahmaud Arbery's is that we hashtag it and we share it. And it's almost like it's the thing to do now. It used to be marching, now it's hashtagging. And it almost seems counterintuitive to what we should be doing. I don't know if I want to turn this into some memorial of someone's death rather than turn it into a call to action. So if you guys, Katrina, Sabastan, Andrew, tell us what we should be doing as opposed to those same old things that haven't been working, marching, hashtagging. That stuff does not work to push change in our community, especially when it comes to mental health.
Right.
Well,
I mean,
I guess I kind of, for me, I'll kind of give you a backdrop. I'm biracial, so my mom is white and my dad is Black. And when I was growing up, my dad experienced a lot of stuff with the police. And so this isn't a new necessarily thing to me individually, right? And while I may not have been the person, we kind of talk about like secondary trauma and things like that, my mom, like when you were talking about your coworkers and things, it doesn't usually bother us if it doesn't impact us, right? And so my mom has a different perception because she's driven and got pulled over until they realized that it was her driving, and then they left her alone because it was my dad's car. So she can feel it different, right? But if you've never experienced those kinds of things, it's not going to hit you like that. And I think we as a culture, and I'm just going to come from the mental health perspective of this, I think us as a culture have to be really careful about this trauma that we've experienced. Because again, I'll use me as an example. I've seen, we've got left at a gas station because the police pulled over and took my dad to jail. So we were young when this happened and my mom was not there. And so we've experienced some things. And I think what happened is when I was, as a kid, I was like, I'm never going to call the police. You're not the one that's going to help me, right? And so part of us have to develop relationships to know that one is not all. And I know that that's a hard thing to say. And I guess I'm just coming from my experience with that, is that when I was younger, it didn't matter what was going to happen to me. We were going to handle it on our own. I am not calling you. But I had to realize that one, or even the group of the ones that I've experienced, right, does not make it all. And so it's helpful if we could find and partner with those who are not the all. Right. And I think that that's what helps us to start mentally shaping those experiences for us, because we'll have the trauma and it will just we'll keep reliving those same feelings. Right. And so we still keep living those fears. We still keep living those hurts. We still keep living those negative responses. Right. Because I think even as an adult, I was in my 30s when I was here and I got pulled over here. And my first response was an attitude. Why are you pulling me over? And I could feel the stuff from when I was little. And she was like, well, you know, where you're coming from. It doesn't matter where I'm coming from. Like we have to change how we experience. It doesn't make, again, like Sabastan said, it doesn't make it that it does not make it okay. None of this makes it okay. None of it makes it diminish that we are hurt and that we are fearful and that it's demeaning to us and that it puts us in a bad space. And it doesn't mean that we don't have the right to feel these things. What we are saying is how we respond has to change. And a big chunk of that has to start here first. I gotta be able to be honest and say, you know what, when I see them, this is how I immediately start to feel, so that I can address with how I can respond to that. Because when we've experienced that, outside of just seeing that, right? But when we've lived some of those things, it hits us and we respond out of that same jerk reaction, right? And so if we don't start with first and realize, hey, this is how I'm responding, and how can I process these feelings in a way that I can respond differently? And then how can I partner with people that will help me individually shape how I'm seeing this, so that I'm not automatically, every time I'm seeing that, respond that way. Again, it doesn't equate to we're erasing what has happened or what is happening. We are saying is that sometimes we have to try to build different relationships and change our perspective to being more open, so that we don't walk and respond in this forever.
And I think what we have to extend that to each other.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of feel like what we tend to do is we want everyone in our community to have the exact same reaction.
That's interesting.
So this is a tragedy. Why aren't you pissed?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, you know, that person may just be hurt, or they may be confused, or they may see that, you know, well, maybe they could have done something different, you know. And so we experience the emotions, but we have to move those emotions into action. And by that, I mean, you cannot experience the emotion and leave it there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So there has to be someone, kind of what she's saying, in your circle to offer a little bit of perspective that'll last longer than your anger.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So today, this week, this month, I'm highly upset because of this tragedy, and you should be. Now, the question then becomes, do you have any intention on doing something about it? And if you do, well, then you're going to now have to move into more of the intellectual part of that, and being motivated to follow a plan through the completion of it. And in most cases, especially when we're talking about these types of things, that's going to be months and years of commitment to see a change. So though we have a right to be upset, that anger lasts for a while. And like any emotion, it will fade and it'll be replaced by other emotions and other experiences. So let's say there's a person and they don't start with the rage. Maybe they're further in the process. You know, that doesn't make them heartless, right? And in the reverse, if you are a person who, like, I can see the logic in it and this is probably what needs to happen, that doesn't mean that, you know, this person is a crazy heretic because they're upset and they're enraged about what's happened. They have a right to do that too. And so, you know, we got to be more accepting of the fact that where you are and your response is valid too. You know, and then couple that with the reality that one is not all. So the person that may have, you know, wronged you in that particular situation does not necessarily reflect an entire organization, even if the organization is corrupt, you know. Like, even if you say, you know, it's a bad school, they don't perform, that does not mean that there aren't good teachers in that school. Right? So a little less deductive all means everyone involved, and a little more case by case, if that makes sense.
I agree. I would say that I think the problem and I'll come from my vantage point, the problem is social media has made it more common. It's more seen now. And so before social media, the same things were happening, just now that we can see them. And so now that we can see them and it's becoming common, and because we as a community, or even as people, we're looking for immediate response, but change comes over time in every situation. You know, I've been racially profiled, I've been pulled over, guy, you know, the cop has his hand on his gun, you know, I'm dressed nice, you know, I'm in a nice tie and button down. And I'm like, you know, well, what's this about? And so now I'm leery anytime I see a police. And now the ones that I trust are people that I knew before they were police. But if I know you before it's police, I don't trust you. And that's because of what I've dealt with. And so I think we have to be mindful that, like y'all say, all people are not the same and all situations are not the same. But we have to be mindful that the place that we come from is going to affect the way we feel about it. And as we get that help or seek that help, we have to realize that we're not always right. And our perception is not always right. And that's hard because then it makes me have to look at myself and say, oh, I'm wrong. And we just don't do that.
One thing that I wanted to say, and I wanted to piggyback on Andrew, is that ironically, you made me think the policeman that's in the news now, that's been accused of the murder of Adrian Medeiros. That same policeman, ironically, I was speaking with my brother, and he was pulled over about 2 or 3 months beforehand by the same policeman. And I asked him about his experience. I said, well, tell me, what was that like? Just trying to get an insight. And he said, well, I saw him with his hand on his gun. I saw him when he was talking in the car, saw his hand. He said, but what I was able to do was I was able, like you said, Andrew, to just kind of think, separate your emotion from the situation. And he said, I didn't give him a chance to think that I was a threat. He said he had to totally switch, and, he tried to provoke him in terms of, how he addressed him and how he came at him. But he just kind of, like I said, switched and was able to de-escalate the situation. So it just kind of hit home, with what you were saying. And when he told me that, my mouth was just open because that very well could have been my brother. And it just hurts. It just hurts. And at some point, something has to change.
Well, I think one of the things that Phil talks about with the Black Business Focus Group is changing it. It has to come from a unified front. Phil's trying to change it. Sabastan, Stephanie, and Katrina, we're trying to change it, but we can't be the only people trying to change it. So we have to get a unified front. We got to know. We have to be. I think education is the key. We have to be educated on how to make those changes, how to impact change. And if we don't have a teachable spirit, as Katrina was saying, then we continue to complete this cycle of being in the same place 5, 10, 15 years from now.
And I appreciate that, everyone. And I think that with that, I think we've come to the end of this panel discussion. This is a part 1 on mental health awareness. We will come back with a part 2 with these panelists if they should agree. And but we want to leave you with a couple of action items that came from this panel discussion. And number 1, we have posted or shared in the comments some of the resources to some mental health resources Katrina Landry put together, and we packaged that up and put it into one succinct list for you to go out and check out. If you're looking for counseling, you can certainly visit one of those links as well. If you'd like to talk with Katrina or Sabastan, you can definitely reach out to them as well. If you want to go to the men's, what I call the men's talk on Monday with Andrew Landry, you're welcome to do that as well. So that's one action item. Go to those resources, check it out. Number 2, consider going to see a counselor. I know it's something that when I first talked to Stephanie, we talked about it, and I was like, I don't need to do that. That ain't for me. I'm good. I pray on it. I'm straight. But I think that is something that, given all of the generational traumas that our community has experienced, the current trauma that we see every day, the racism that we experience, is probably a good idea just to go and get a tune-up. So everybody consider going to see a counselor. And then lastly, let's keep building our community. If you're in the Black Business Focus Group, you know what to do. You need to be buying Black at least 3 times a month, supporting Black-owned businesses. If you are an ally of our community, go to the table. Check out To the Table's website, check out our directory. If you want to support a Black-owned business, you can do so there. Definitely do your part to help build our community. Those 3 action items we'll list in our comments. And then we'll close real quick with something I always say. We have to remember right now, it's our time, but it's up to us. So that means that it's up to you. So thank you all. We're going to end this live feed now, and I'm going to ask my panelists to stay on. And thank you guys so much, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks.